What if one of Burkina Faso's most overlooked economic opportunities has been falling to the ground for decades? Every cashew harvest tells two very different stories. One is familiar. The cashew nut is collected, sold, and shipped into a global market worth billions of dollars. The other story is far less visible. Beneath the same trees lies the cashew apple, soft, highly perishable, and historically difficult to commercialize at scale. Burkinabe authorities say the country produces more than 2 million tons of these apples each year. For a long time, much of that potential ended before a serious value chain could even begin. Captain Ibrahim Traore now wants to test whether that can change. In May 2025, he launched construction of a processing plant in Peni, in southwestern Burkina Faso. The investment is roughly 6.6 billion CFA francs, about $11 million. Its planned capacity is 5,000 tons of cashew apples per year, producing concentrate that can support products including juice, vinegar, alcohol, and cashew wine. Those numbers sound impressive until we put them into perspective. If the official estimate of more than 2 million tons of cashew apples is accurate, Péni's planned capacity represents only a tiny fraction of the national total. This factory alone cannot solve Burkina Faso's entire problem of wasted fruits. And that may be precisely why Peni matters. It can be viewed not as the final answer, but as a test of a different economic formula. Instead of allowing the value chain to stop shortly after harvest, Burkina Faso is asking whether more steps can happen at home. Collection, processing, quality control, packaging, distribution, and eventually the sale of higher value products. That is the larger story we are going to examine. Because building the factory may actually be the easiest part. The harder challenge is creating the skills, supply networks, packaging, transportation, standards, and customers needed to keep it running profitably. If you want to understand how African countries are trying to turn resources into lasting economic capacity, follow this channel as we examine what happens next. Because Peni is not simply testing a fruit, it is testing whether Burkina Faso can make its value chain continue after the harvest ends. Burkina Faso's cashew problem is not a story about having nothing to sell. It is almost the opposite. The country already produces a valuable agricultural commodity and already earns significant money from it. In 2024, Burkina Faso produced roughly 161,000 tons of raw cashew nuts, according to industry data. Yet only about 16,000 tons were processed domestically. Trade figures show that more than 113,000 tons of cashew nuts were exported that year, generating approximately $111 million. That is real income, and it matters. But those numbers also reveal the question at the heart of Traore's industrial strategy. What happens to the value after the raw products leaves Burkina Faso? A cashew nut does not stop creating economic activity when it crosses a border. Someone processes it, someone grades it, someone packages it, someone transports the finished product, someone builds a brand around it, and eventually someone places it on the supermarket shelf and earns a margin from the final customer. Every additional step can support workers, businesses, technical skills, and tax revenue. Burkina Faso has historically captured only part of that journey. Then consider the other half of the tree. Burkinabe authorities estimate that the country produces more than 2 million tons of cashew apples annually. Unlike the nut, the apple is extremely perishable and has been difficult to commercialize on a large scale. Much of its potential value has therefore never entered a formal industrial chain. This is what makes the Peni experiment different. The objective is not simply to grow more cashews. Burkina Faso already knows how to grow them. The deeper objective is to extend the economic life of what it already produces. That distinction matters. Natural resources do not automatically make a country prosperous. The more important question is how many useful and competitive activities can be built around those resources before their value leaves the economy. So the question facing Burkina Faso is no longer simply how much cashew it can produce. It is how much of the cashew's total economic journey Burkina Faso can realistically learn to perform for itself. That brings us to Peni, where Burkina Faso is testing what happens when a product once treated as waste becomes industrial raw material. The planned facility represents an investment of roughly 6.6 billion CFA francs, or about $11 million. Its annual processing capacity is expected to reach 5,000 tons of cashew apples. From that fruit, the facility is designed to produce concentrate that can support several products, including juice, vinegar, ethanol, and cashew wine. The important idea is diversification. Instead of seeing the cashew tree as producing only one commercially valuable product, Burkina Faso is trying to build several revenue opportunities from the same harvest. A fruit that once had little organized commercial demand could enter different markets and support different businesses. But there is an important reality check. Burkina Faso authorities estimate annual cashew apple production at more than 2 million tons. Compared with that figure, Peni's planned 5,000 ton capacity represents only about 0.25%. That makes it difficult to argue that a single factory will transform the entire sector. A better way to understand Peni is as a demonstration. Can farmers and collectors deliver enough fresh fruit quickly enough? Can the factory maintain quality? Can its products compete on price and taste? Can distributors move them efficiently? And most importantly, will customers actually buy them? If those questions receive positive answers, the model can potentially grow. That possibility already appears to be part of the government's thinking. After launching the Peni project, Traore instructed officials to study the feasibility of additional processing units in other producing areas, including Orodara, Bamfora, and Gaoua. That changes the meaning of the first factory. Peni does not need to process millions of tons to matter at the beginning. It needs to demonstrate that a functioning commercial chain can be created around fruits that previously generated little value. If that chain works, Burkina Faso can consider expanding it. And that is where this modest 5,000 ton experiment becomes more interesting than its size suggests. Because the real product being tested in Peni is not simply cashew juice. It is a business model that Burkina Faso may eventually try to reproduce elsewhere. But a factory cannot process fruit that never reaches its gates. That is why Peni's location may prove just as important as the machinery inside it. Cashew apples are soft, full of moisture, and highly perishable. Once harvested, they can deteriorate quickly. Unlike dried cashew nuts, they cannot simply sit for long periods while traders decide where to send them. Speed matters. Peni lies close to important cashew producing areas in southwestern Burkina Faso. The strategy is to organize collection networks that connect producers with their processing facility, including cooperatives involving local women. Think about what that changes for a farmer. Previously, the nuts represented the obvious commercial product. The apple could have little organized demand and might be left behind. If a nearby processor begins purchasing that apple, something previously discarded can become an additional source of income from the same tree. Authorities expect the facility to support 112 direct jobs and more than 1,000 indirect jobs. Those indirect opportunities matter because the processing industry requires more than factory workers. Someone must collect the fruit, someone must transport it, someone must organize producers, handle supplies, maintain equipment, and move finished products toward customers. Burkina Faso is not beginning entirely from zero. Previous development programs in the country's cashew sector have already trained tens of thousands of producers and connected thousands of farmers with local processors. But processing cashew apples creates new demands. Workers need to understand hygiene, fermentation, quality control, storage, and industrial equipment. Cooperatives need reliable schedules. Transporters need to move fragile fruit quickly. The factory needs enough suitable raw material arriving consistently to keep its machines productive. This is where the promise of Peni meets its first serious test. A building can be financed. Machinery can be purchased. A ribbon can be cut. A dependable supply network is harder to create. And the projected jobs and rural income will only become lasting economic gains if that network continues functioning season after season. Even then, getting the fruit through the factory gate solves only half the problem. Because after Burkina Faso learns how to make cashew juice, vinegar, and wine, it faces an even more important question. Who will actually buy them? And this is where Péni moves from an industrial project to a market test. Producing cashew juice is one achievement. Convincing people to spend their money on it repeatedly is something entirely different. The first potential market is Burkina Faso itself. Local consumers could provide the factory with its most accessible customer base, but a made in Burkina label cannot replace taste, safety, convenience, or price. Cashew apples naturally have an astringent quality, so processors must create drinks that people genuinely enjoy. There is encouraging evidence elsewhere in West Africa. In Benin, women organized through the Agbara Olua cooperative have processed cashew apples into juice and sold the product not only domestically but also into neighboring markets, including Niger, Togo, and Burkina Faso. That experience demonstrates that a regional market for cashew apple products can exist, but it does not prove that demand is unlimited. Research from other African cashew producing countries has identified limited markets, expensive equipment, financing difficulties, technical skills, and the fruit's short shelf life as obstacles to commercial expansion. That distinction is essential. Péni does not succeed simply because bottles leave the production line. Those bottles must move through shops and eventually into customers' homes. Burkina Faso, therefore, has several markets to test. First comes domestic demand. Then neighboring countries in West Africa could offer opportunities for regional expansion. Beyond that, international markets may become possible, but they will demand even greater consistency in quality, food safety, packaging, price, and supply. This is why patriotic messaging alone will never be enough. A customer may buy a Burkinabe drink once because he wants to support local industry. But if the taste disappoints him, if the bottle leaks, if the price is too high, or if the product disappears from stores for months, national pride will not create a sustainable business. Patriotism may persuade someone to try a Burkinabe drink once. Quality has to persuade him to buy it again. And that brings us to another overlooked part of Traore's industrial ambition. The future of Burkina Faso's cashew industry may depend not only on the fruit or the factory, but on something far less dramatic: the bottle that carries the product to market. And that bottle reveals something important about what economic sovereignty actually requires. Imagine that the cashew apple is grown in Burkina Faso, collected by Burkinabe farmers, and processed inside the Peni factory. That sounds like a complete local success. But if the bottle, cap, specialized packaging materials, machinery parts, or other essential inputs must still be purchased from abroad, some of the value continues to leave the country. This does not make the project a failure. Modern industries everywhere depend on outside suppliers. But it shows why building one factory is not the same as building an industrial ecosystem. Burkinabe businesses have previously identified packaging as a serious challenge for locally produced goods. Cost, availability, design, and preservation can determine whether a domestic product can compete with an imported one. Then comes quality control. A drink must remain safe and consistent after leaving the production line. It has to survive storage, transportation, handling, and time on a store shelf. Poor packaging or improper storage can destroy value that farmers and factory workers spent weeks creating. Then comes logistics. Someone needs to move bottles from Péni to Bobo Dioulasso, Ouagadougou, and potentially markets across West Africa. Trucks need reliable routes, distributors need inventory, retailers need dependable deliveries. The real value chain, therefore, looks much longer than the factory itself. The farmer grows the fruit. Collectors gather it. The factory processes it. Technicians test it. Packaging protects it. Warehouses store it. Trucks transport it. Retailers display it. Finally, A customer decides whether the entire chain was worth building. If one link repeatedly fails, profits can quickly become spoiled products, empty shelves, or unsold inventory. This is why the Peni experiment is ultimately about much more than cashew processing. It is testing whether Burkina Faso can coordinate many different economic capabilities around one product. And this brings Ibrahim Traore's role into sharper focus. A president can launch a factory and direct government policy toward domestic processing. But can political leadership create all the businesses, skills, standards, and markets that must grow around it? That is where Traore's larger economic strategy deserves closer examination. Traore's role is important, but it needs to be understood carefully. He did not discover the economic potential of the cashew apple. Other countries were already processing the fruit, and Burkina Faso already had experience in the cashew industry. What his government is attempting is different. It is using state policy to push more stages of production onto Burkinabe soil. Péni is one example. After launching the project, Traore instructed officials to examine whether similar processing facilities could be developed in other producing areas. Then, in December 2025, he inaugurated Burkina Cashew in Bobo Dioulasso, a separate facility focused on processing cashew nuts. Taken together, these projects reveal a broader idea. The fruits can be processed, the nuts can be processed, farmers can supply local factories, workers can acquire industrial skills, businesses can potentially emerge around transportation, packaging, maintenance, and distribution. The objective is to capture more economic activity from the same agricultural resource. Government policy has also been used to influence where raw materials go. In 2025, Burkina Faso temporarily suspended exports of raw cashew nuts in an effort to improve supplies for domestic processors. The restriction was later lifted, an important detail, because permanent protection can create problems of its own. This gives us a clearer picture of Traore's economic experiment. The old formula was relatively simple: produce a raw commodity, export it, and collect the revenue. The new formula he is testing is longer: produce the resource, process more of it domestically, create jobs and skills, sell higher value products, and reinvest more of the resulting income inside the economy. But political leadership has limits. Traore can make industrialization a national priority. His government can support financing, adjust trade policy, and encourage new factories. He cannot order customers to enjoy cashew juice. He cannot command a factory to become profitable, and he cannot guarantee that every protected industry will become competitive. That is where political ambition meets economic reality. The success of Traore's strategy will ultimately depend not on how many factories are announced, but on whether those factories can operate efficiently, find customers, and survive. At this point, another question becomes unavoidable. Is the West actually afraid of what Burkina Faso is building? That claim makes for a dramatic headline, but the available evidence does not support it. There is no reliable evidence that Western governments or institutions have launched a campaign against the Peni cashew project itself. That distinction matters, especially because Traore has become such a polarizing figure internationally. Western media have raised serious criticisms of his government. These include concerns about restrictions on press freedom, the extension of military rule, growing concentration of political power, and the powerful personality cult surrounding Traore on social media. Foreign investors may also worry when governments change resource policies quickly or intervene heavily in markets. Those concerns should not simply be dismissed. But they also do not answer the economic question before us. A government can face legitimate political criticism while pursuing an industrial project that has economic logic. In the same way, building a promising factory does not erase legitimate concerns about governance. There is another fact that complicates the idea that the West simply wants Africa to remain an exporter of raw materials. The World Bank has supported efforts to expand domestic cashew processing in Côte d'Ivoire. Those programs have promoted infrastructure, training, private investment, agricultural productivity, and local processing. In other words, A major international institution with strong Western participation has supported precisely the kind of value addition that Burkina Faso is now trying to expand. So the meaningful debate is not West against Africa. It is whether Burkina Faso can make its industrial strategy work. Government intervention can help a young industry obtain raw materials, financing, and time to develop. But protection that lasts too long can also shelter inefficient businesses, distort prices, and hurt farmers. That is why Péni should ultimately be judged by evidence rather than political slogans from either side. The strongest answer to international skepticism will not be another speech about sovereignty. It will be a factory that keeps running, farmers who keep earning, workers who keep their jobs, and customers who keep returning. If Burkina Faso can achieve that, the results will speak far louder than any argument about who supports Traore and who does not. And this is where the lesson from Péni becomes larger than Burkina Faso. Across Africa, the central question is not whether every country should stop exporting raw materials, nor is the answer to build a factory beside every farm. The more useful question is simpler. Which additional part of a value chain can African economies perform competitively for themselves? Côte d'Ivoire offre un instructive exemple. Its expansion of domestic cashew processing has been supported by investments in roads, farmer training, financing, better production, and connections between processors and markets. Programs associated with that transformation have helped create more than 18,000 jobs, with women accounting for a large share of them. The lesson is not simply to copy Côte d'Ivoire. It is to understand that factories succeed when the system around them works. For Burkina Faso, that means Péni needs farmers, collectors, technicians, packaging, transporters, retailers, financing, and customers. For another African country, the weakest link may be electricity. Somewhere else, it may be ports, skills, storage, or access to capital. And African countries do not necessarily need to build every link alone. Imagine Burkina Faso processing agricultural products while packaging comes from another African manufacturer. Regional transport networks could move those products through coastal ports. Consumers in Mali, Niger, Ghana, and other markets could provide demand. Skills and technology could circulate between neighboring economies. That would turn Pan-African cooperation from a political slogan into an economic network. Economic sovereignty should therefore not mean isolation from the world. Trade, foreign investment, technology, and international partnerships can remain valuable. Sovereignty is having more choices. It means having enough productive capacity to decide whether to export a raw material, process it locally, sell it regionally, or negotiate with international buyers from a stronger position. That is the wider significance of the experiment in Péni. If Burkina Faso can prove that one neglected agricultural product can support new skills, businesses, and markets, the lesson for Africa will not be about cashew apples alone. It will be about learning to ask a better question whenever a resource leaves the continent. How much more value could have been created before it left? So we return to where the story began. A cashew apple falls beneath a tree in Burkina Faso. For decades, that could have been the end of its economic journey. Today, Péni is testing another possibility. The fruit can move from the farmer to a collection cooperative, from the cooperative to a factory, from processing into a bottle, and from that bottle onto a store shelf. That journey sounds simple. It is not. Burkina Faso already has the raw material. The Péni project can provide new processing capacity. Ibrahim Traore has made domestic transformation part of a broader industrial ambition, but the final outcome will depend on less dramatic things. Skilled workers, reliable collection, quality standards, packaging, transportation, competitive prices, and customers willing to return. That is why success should not be measured by speeches, ceremonies, or the capacity written on a factory sign. Ask different questions. How many tons does Péni actually process? How much additional income reaches farmers? How many jobs remain after several years? Are the products competitive? Do customers buy them twice? And can the model eventually expand without permanent protection? Those questions matter far beyond Burkina Faso. Across West Africa and the wider Sahel, debates surrounding Ibrahim Traore, Assimi Goïta in Mali, and Abdourahmane Tchiani in Niger often center on sovereignty, France, security, and political power. African news coverage frequently focuses on those dramatic questions. The African Union also faces the broader challenge of what meaningful African economic integration should become. But economic sovereignty is built in quieter places too. It is built when a farmer gains another buyer, when a technician learns another skill, when an African factory produces something people genuinely want, and when regional economies create more value together before their resources leave the continent. If Péni succeeds, the lesson is not that every African country needs a cashew factory. The lesson is to examine what leaves the economy too early and ask what competitive step could happen at home or elsewhere in Africa first. That may be the real formula Traore is testing. If you were deciding Burkina Faso's next investment, would you choose another factory, better packaging, stronger transportation, or a larger market? Share your choice below and follow the channel as we continue examining the economic changes reshaping Africa. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos.